We will cover supply next. Supply is extremely important part of the game, as was in the World War II. Units were consuming large amounts of fuel and ammunition, and cutting off unit supply for just a few days rendered it pretty ineffective. This is modeled by gradually reducing enemy attack and movement abilities as supply gets lower and lower. So we show unit supply by second number here. First number is unit strength, second number is unit supply. That's sort of like supply stockpiles that unit has. Once those are exhausted, unit cannot move or attack, and this gets replenished and spent each turn when unit is moving or attacking. Different types of units spend more or less. For example, artillery uses a lot of supply when attacking, also bombers. But they also get replenished if they are on supplied hexes. Supply comes from supply sources. Those can be either a supply town, in case usually of defenders, so that's a town that produces ammunition or from which fuel is shipped. Or in case of attackers, it's usually edge of the map where there is a supply source on the side of the map from which supply gets transported from the attackers' hometowns. So in case of, for example, in Germany, in this case, you need to have a supply fleet in harbor, which shows where supplies are getting shipped from. This supply fleet can be destroyed, in which case supply no longer flows from this harbor. So basically, once you have a supply source like this, for example, so we have a German supply source on the border where that is closer to Germany, and then supply spreads from that point. There are two, let's say, modes how it can spread. First is by railroad. So from supply source, if there is a railroad, all the railroad hexes that are connected and not cut off are connected with this original supply source. So it spreads in all directions until it reaches an enemy unit or an enemy town. So in both those cases, this is the cutoff point for supply by railroad. From that point on, supply spreads by trucks, and it spreads in two ways. One is from railroad hexes. It spreads for one full day of truck transport. So trucks go for a full day depending on movement cost of terrain. So in roads they spread further, and in difficult terrain they spread less. And also they spread from supply towns. For example, this town is supply town, and in that case supply spreads for 3 truck turns, because towns are considered supply hubs that have supply stockpiles stored. In this way, supply towns are extremely strategically important, and it's beneficial to take control of them as soon as possible. As mentioned before, supply can be bombed, so in this case you have an enemy supply source, but you can also bomb a supply town. So if you select a bomber and fly over it and bomb it, you will see that the supply counter is reduced. So each town has a 10 supply counters. In this case we did 4 damage. Once the supply counter drops to 0, that town no longer supplies any units. Also, if, for example, there are multiple towns connected, for example, this town here, and units here, any town that has supply damage, there is a chance that supply is cut off in that town. So, for example, there is currently with damage of 4 there, and if supply source was here, here, so there would be a 40% chance that no units receive supply after this point. So there's 40% chance that supply is cut off in this town. This, of course, is gradually repaired, but a sustained bombing offensive can quickly leave units out of supply. I've also mentioned that supply fleets can be bombed and destroyed, so keep an eye on them. And also, the only way that you can have supply spread by railroad is if you have a ship in port. Ship can also supply units if it's just near the beach, but in that case, it just spreads for one truck turn around the ship, and that's it.